Hello and welcome to this, the first video in the 1001 Arabian Nights. This is a series which will be a little bit different to my usual content, even that of the original fairy tale content, as I won't go into the history of each tale, but because of the books that I have of this series, for want of a better word, it will just be me reading aloud. Now, as such, because of the whole point of the 1001 Tales is, if you didn't know, the stories begin, they get to the middle, and then end. They end in the middle. And the whole point of Shahrazad staying alive was so that she could make it to the next day without being killed, and therefore left the stories on the cliffhangers so that they would want her to stay alive so that they could hear the rest of the story the next night. And the next night she would finish the story and start again, another one, which she would then leave on a cliffhanger for the next night, and so on and so forth. So the way these videos are going to come out, I am going to attempt to have a video every night. These videos will be coming out at 8 o'clock or 9 o'clock at night, and they won't have an intro and they won't have an outro apart from this one, so that when they're in a playlist they can be watched or listened to seamlessly without any interruptions, exactly how you would read it in the book. It's the first time I'm doing this. Usually when I just read aloud it is just poetry, so this is a new challenge for me, so bear with me and I hope you enjoy it. Now, this series is most definitely not for children, especially the beginning of it. As with most original fairy tales, etc., they are not made for children to listen to. In this, because of the way of the old school way it's written, if there are any terms that would be racist now that are written in that, I will not be saying them. I'll be just skipping over it, as I will be skipping over some of the more religious connotations to it, so there won't be exclamations of a religious nature. There's a lot of them and it gets a bit tedious. Also, my pronunciation of some of the names of the characters and places, etc., are going to be difficult at best. So if you're watching this and you're from the Middle East, or if you know this language, please don't be offended that I am trying my best to read it as it is. If you know a better way of pronouncing it, or the way that it's supposed to be pronounced and I am butchering it without realising, put that down in the comments of the video. These videos are going to be recorded in batches, so you might notice that it'll take a few videos for me to actually implement how you've said to say something, but I will try my best. And with that in mind, let us begin. It is related that there was, in the tide and show of ancient time, and the passage of the age and of the moment, a king among the kings of Sazan in the isles of India and China. He was the master of armies and auxiliaries, of slaves and of a great following, and he had 2 sons, one tall and the other small. Both were heroic horsemen, but the taller was the greater in this exercise, and reigned over lands and governed with justice among men, so that the peoples of the land and of the kingdom loved him. His name was King Shariah. The smaller brother was called King Shahzaman, and ruled over Samarkand al-Ajam. Both lived in their countries and were just rulers of the people for a space of 20 years, by the end of which time each was at the height of his splendour and his growth. This was the way with them until the tall king was seized by a violent longing to see his brother. Then he commanded his vizier to depart and return with him, and the vizier answered, "I hear and I obey." The vizier set out, and arriving in all security by the grace of Allah, entered the presence of the brother, wished him peace, and told him the purpose of his journey. King Shahzaman answered, "I hear and I obey." Then he made preparations for his departure and for the going out of his tents, his camels and his mules, his slaves and fighting men. Lastly, he raised his own vizier to the governorship and departed to seek the lands of his brother. But in the middle of the night he recalled a thing which he had left forgotten at the palace. Returning and entering, he found his wife stretched on her bed and being embraced by a slave. At this sight the world darkened before his face, and he said within his soul, "If such a thing has come to pass when I have hardly left the city, what would the conduct of this wanton be if I were absent for long at my brother's house? So he drew his sword, and with one stroke killed them upon the carpets of the bed. Then he returned, and ordering his camp to move forward, journeyed through the night till he came to his brother's city. His brother rejoiced at his approach, went out to meet him, and, greeting him, wished him peace. Also he adorned the city for him, and began to speak with him jovially. But King Schahzaman, remembering the affair of his wife, and a cloud of grief veiled him, his cheeks became sallow, and his body frail. King Shahryar, seeing him in this pass, and thinking it was due to his exile from lands and kingdom, questioned him no further on the subject, and let him be. But on a later day he said, "My brother, I know not, and yet I see your body grow frail, and your cheeks sallow." Schahzaman answered, "My brother, I am stricken in the heart of my heart." But he did not reveal what he had seen happen to his wife. So King Shahryar continued, "Then come hunting and coursing with me, for in that pursuit perhaps your breast may throw off this trouble." But King Schahzaman had no wish to do so, and his brother went out to hunt alone. Now there were in the king's palace certain windows that looked onto the garden, and as King Schahzaman leaned there and looked out, the door of the palace opened, and 20 women slaves with 20 men slaves came from it, and the wife of the king, his brother, was among them, and walked there in all her bright beauty. When they came to the pool of a fountain, they all undressed and mingled one with another. Suddenly, on the king's wife crying out a name, a gigantic slave ran towards her, embraced her, and turning her upon her back, enjoyed her. At this signal, all the other men slaves did the same with the women, and they continued thus a long while, not ceasing their kisses and embraces, and goings in, and the like, until the approach of dawn. At this sight the king's brother said within himself, "Mine is even a lighter misfortune than his." So he let his grief and discontent slip from him, saying to himself, "Truly this is more terrible than all which happened to me." And from that moment he began to drink again, and to eat without pause. Meanwhile the king, his brother, came back from hunting, and the two wished each other peace. Then King Shahryar, observing his brother Schahzaman, saw that colour and life had come back to him, and further that he, who had so long dealt sparingly with his food, now ate abundantly. So, in his astonishment, he asked him the explanation of this, and the other answered, "Listen, and I will tell you the cause of my former pallor. When you sent your vizier to me to require my presence at your side, I made my preparation for departure and left my city. But afterwards, remembering the present which I destined for you, and which I gave you at the palace, I went back and found my wife lying with a slave, the two sleeping upon the carpets of my bed. I killed the pair of them and made my way to you, thrice wretched in my thought for what had happened. That was the cause of my former paleness and loss of strength. As for the return of colour to my cheeks, spare me, I pray, from speaking of it." When his brother heard these words, he said, "I conjure you to tell me the other half of the matter." So King Schahzaman told him all he had seen. And King Shahryar exclaimed, "First I must see this with my own eyes." To this his brother answered, "Make it appear then that you are going out to hunt and course, but hide instead with me, and you shall be a witness of the sight, and see the truth of it." Immediately the king proclaimed his departure by the public crier, and the soldiers went out beyond the city with their tents. The king went forth also, and, settling himself in his tents, said to his young slaves, "Let no one enter." Then he disguised himself, and, leaving secretly, went towards the palace where his brother was. On his arrival he stationed himself at the window, giving on to the garden. Scarcely had an hour passed when the women slaves, circling about their mistress, came into the garden with the men slaves, and they did all that Schahzaman had told of them, and passed the time in these diversions until the beginning of the sun's decline. When King Shahryar saw these things, reason fled from her seat in his mind, and he said to his brother Schahzaman, "Let us go hence and fare forth to seek our destiny upon the road of Allah, for we have no right in royalty, nor shall have until we have found someone who has met a fate like ours. Without that, in truth, death would be better than our lives." To this his brother made the fitting answer, and both went out by a secret door of the palace. They travelled night and day until they came to a tree in the middle of a lonely meadow near the salt sea. In this meadow there was an islet of fresh water at which they drank, and afterwards sat down to rest. An hour had hardly passed when the sea began to be troubled, and suddenly a column of black smoke came up out of it, which rose to the sky and moved towards the meadow. Seeing this, they became afraid, and climbed as high as they were able to into the tall tree, and began to consider what this might mean. Then, behold, the smoke column changed to a genie of great size, vast-shouldered, gigantically breasted, and carrying on his head a box. He put foot to the earth, came towards the tree in which they were, and stopped below it. Then he lifted the lid of the box, and took from it a large coffer, which he also opened. And thereupon appeared a desirable young girl, bright in her beauty, shining like the sun. As the poet says, "She comes a torch in the shadows, and it is day. Her light more brightly lights the dawn. Suns leap out from her beauty, and the moons are born in the smiling of her eyes. Ah, that the veils of her mystery might be rent, and the folk of the world lie ravished at her feet. Forced by the great light of her sweet glancing, wet tears smart forth from every watching eye." When the genie had looked long at the beauty of the girl, he said to her, "O queen of every silky thing, O you whom I ravished away upon your bridal night, I would sleep a little." And the genie, resting his head upon the knees of the young girl, went to sleep. Then the child raised her head and saw the two kings hidden in the tree-top. At once she lifted the head of the genie from her knees, rested it upon the ground, and stood up beneath the tree, saying to them by signs, "Come down, have no fear of this Ifrit." They also answered by signs, "Pray excuse us from such a dangerous undertaking." She said, "Come down quickly, or I will warn the Ifrit, and he shall kill you with the worst of deaths." Then they were afraid, and came down beside her, and she said at once, "Come, pierce me violently with your lances, if not, I will wake the Ifrit." Then Shariah said faithfully to Husbandman, "You, my brother, do first what she requires." To which the other answered, "I will do nothing until you have given me an example, my elder brother." And each began to coax the other, making with their eyes gestures of coupling. Then she said, "Why do I see you working your eyes in this way? If you do not come forward and do it to me at once, I will wake the Ifrit." So, in their fear of the genie, they both did to her as she had commanded, and when they were well wearied, she said, "You are indeed experienced riders." Then, drawing from her pocket a little bag, she took from it a necklace of 570 seal rings, saying, "Know you what these are?" And they answered, "We do not know." Then she said, "The givers of these seal rings have all coupled with me on the unwitting horns of this Ifrit. So now, O brothers, give me yours." Then they gave her their seal rings, taking them off their hands. Whereon she said, "Know that this Ifrit carried me off on the night of my marriage, prisoned me in a coffer and placed that coffer in a box, and fastened about the box 7 chains, yes, and then laid me at the bottom of the moaning sea that wars and dashes with its waves. But he did not know that whenever any one of us women desires a thing, nothing can prevent her from it." And the poet said besides, "Friend, trust not at all in women, smile at their promising, for they lower all they love at the caprice of their parts. Filled to the mouth with deceit, they lavish a lying love, even while the very floss fringing their silks is faithless. Respect and remember the words of Yusuf. Forget not Iblis worked all Adam's woe with one woman. Rail not, my friend, at this house at whom you are railing. Mild love tomorrow will give place to madness. Say not, if I love, I'll escape the follies of loving, but rather, only a miracle brings a man safe from among them." At these words the brothers marvelled even to the limits of marvelling, and said to each other, "If this be a genie, and in spite of his power much more terrible things have happened to him than to us, it is an adventure which ought to console us." So at that same hour they left the young woman, and returned each to his own city. When King Shariah entered his palace, he caused his wife's head to be cut off at the neck, and in the same way the heads of the slaves, both men and women. Then he ordered his vizier to bring him every night a young and virgin girl, whom he ravished and, when the night had passed, caused to be slain. This he did for 3 long years, so that the people were all one cry of grief, one tumult of horror. They fled away with such daughters as remained to them, and in all the city there remained not one girl who retained the state to serve for this assault. At last the king, as was his custom, ordered the vizier to bring him a young girl, and the vizier went forth and hunted, but found no girl at all. So he returned to his own home, dejected and wretched, and with his soul full of his fear of the king. Now this vizier had himself 2 daughters, who in the matters of beauty, charm, brilliance, perfection, and delicate taste were each unrivalled save by the other. The name of the elder was Shahrazad, and that of the younger Dunyazad. Shahrazad had read the books, the annals, and the legends of old kings, together with the histories of past peoples. Also she was credited with possessing 1,000 books of stories, telling of the peoples, the kings, and the poets of bygone ages and of past time. She was sweetly eloquent of speech, and to listen to her was music. When she had looked at her father, she said, "Why do I see you so bowed and changed with care and sorrow? Know, my father, that the poet says, 'Thou who art sad, O be comforted, for nothing endures, and as every joy vanishes away, so also vanishes every sorrow.'" When the vizier heard these words, he told his daughter from beginning to end all that had happened concerning the king. Then Shahrazad said, "Father, you must marry me to this king, for either I shall live, or, dying, I shall be a ransom for the daughters, and the cause of their deliverance out of the hands of the king." Then said he, "You shall never expose yourself to such danger." And she answered, "It is necessary that I do this." So he said to her, "Take care that the fate of the ass with the bull and the husbandman befall not you also. Listen. Know, my daughter, that there was once a merchant, master of riches and cattle, married, and the father of children, to whom Allah had also given understanding of the tongues of beasts and birds. The place of this merchant's house was in a fertile land on the bank of a river, and in his farm there was an ass and a bull. One day the bull came to the stable where the ass was lodged, and found it well swept and watered, with well winnowed barley in the manger, and on the ground well sifted straw, and the ass lying there at his ease. For when his master mounted him, it would only be for some short ride that chance demanded, and the ass would quickly return to his rest. Now on that day the merchant heard the bull say to the ass, "Give you joy of your food, and may you find it healthy, profitable, and of good digestion. I myself am weary, but you are rested. You eat well winnowed barley, and are cared for, and if, on occasion, your master mounts you, he brings you quickly back. As for me, I am but used to labour and to work the mill." And the ass said, "When you go out into the field, and they put the yoke upon your neck, throw yourself to the earth, and do not rise, even if they beat you. Also, when you do get up, fall down again immediately. And after, if they let you back to the byre and give you beans to eat, leave them as if you were ill. Force yourself in this way not to eat or drink for a day or 2, or even 3. Thus you will rest from your labour and your weariness." Remember that the merchant was there and heard their words. When the husbandman came to give forage to the bull, he saw that he ate very little, and when in the morning he took him out to work, he found him to be ill. Then the merchant said to the husbandman, "Take the ass and make him work in the bull's place for the whole day." So the man returned and took the ass in place of the bull, and made it labour during the whole day. When the ass came back to the stable at the end of the day, the bull thanked him for his goodness of heart and for having let him rest from his fatigue. But the ass answered nothing, and instead repented very bitterly. Next day the husbandman came and took the ass again, and made him work till the fall of day, so that the ass returned with a galled neck and broken by fatigue. Then the bull, seeing the state he was in, began to thank him with effusion and load him with praises. To which the ass replied, "How restful were the days before this, when nothing but luxury was my lot," and added, "Meanwhile I will give you a piece of good advice. I heard our master say, 'If the bull does not get up from his place, we must hand him over to the slaughterer to kill, and to make a leather cloth for the table. I am much afraid for your safety.'" When the bull heard the ass's words, he thanked him and said, "Tomorrow I will go with them freely and attend to my labours." With that he began to eat and swallowed all the forage and even licked the bushel clean with his tongue. Remember, their master saw and heard all this. When the day came, the merchant went out with his wife towards the buyers, and both of them sat down. Then the husbandman came and took out the bull, who, at the sight of his master, began to frisk his tail and loudly break wind and gallop wildly in all directions. The merchant was seized with such laughter that he rolled on his back. His wife asked, "What are you laughing at?" He answered, "At a thing which I have seen and heard, but of which I may not tell you without dying." And she said, "You must tell me the reason for your laughter, even if you do have to die for it." He said, "I cannot tell you, because I fear to die." Then said she, "I know you are laughing at me." After this she did not cease to quarrel and confound him with wilful words, until she drove him into great perplexity. Finally he made his children come to him, and sent to call the Cadi and witnesses, wishing to make his will before he should tell the secret to his wife and die. For he greatly loved his wife, since she was the daughter of his father's brother and the mother of his children, and since he had lived with her for 120 years. Further, he invited all his wife's relatives and the folk of the district, and, relating the story, told them how he would die on the instant of revealing his secret. Then all who were present said to the wife, "Leave this matter on one side, lest your husband, the father of your children, die." But she answered, "I will never leave him in peace until he tells me, even if he has to die for it." So they stopped reasoning with her, and the merchant rose from among them and went by the side of the stable towards the garden, in order that he might first make his death ablution there, and then return to tell his secret and to die. Now the merchant had a valiant cock which could satisfy 50 hens, and also a good dog. And he heard the dog calling to the cock and scolding it, saying, "Are you not ashamed of being so gay when our master is on the point of death?" Then the cock asked the dog how this was so, and when the dog had told him the story, he exclaimed, "Our master is extraordinarily lacking in intelligence. I myself have 50 wives, and I succeed very well by contenting one and scolding another, while he, who has only one wife, does not know the way of dealing even with her. It is quite simple. He has but to cut himself some good mulberry twigs, go back in strength to his private room, and beat her until she either dies or repents. She will not importune him with any questions on any subject after that, I do assure you." So the cock spoke, and when the merchant heard him, light returned to his reason, and he resolved to beat his wife. Here the vizier paused in his story, and said to his daughter Shahrazad, "It may be I shall do to you as the merchant did to his wife." She asked him, "What did he do?" And the vizier continued, "The merchant entered his wife's chamber, after having cut and hidden about him certain mulberry twigs, and called to her, saying, 'Come into my private room, that I may tell you my secret, out of the sight of all, and then die.' So she entered with him, and he shut the door of the private room, and fell upon her with redoubled blows until she swooned away. Finally, when she could speak, she cried, 'I repent, I repent,' and beginning to caress her husband's hands and feet, did repent in very truth. Afterwards she walked out with him, and all the relatives and those gathered there rejoiced. Happy and prosperous were the fortunes of them all until their deaths." Thus he spoke, and when Shahrazad, the vizier's daughter, heard her father's story, she said, "Even so, my father, I wish you to do what I have asked you." So the vizier, without insisting further, had the wedding garments of his daughter Shahrazad made ready, and then went to tell the matter to King Shahryar. Meanwhile, Shahrazad gave these instructions to her young sister. "When I am with the king, I will send to fetch you. Then when you have come, and when you see the king finish his act with me, you must say, 'Tell me, my sister, some of your stories of marvel, that the night may pass pleasantly.' Then I will tell you tales which, if Allah wills, shall be the deliverance of the daughters of all." After this, the vizier, her father, came to take her, and went up with her into the presence of the king. And the king, being overborne with happiness, said to him, "Is the needful thing indeed present?" And respectfully the vizier answered, "Yes." But when the king wished to take the young girl, she began to weep, so that he asked, "What ails you?" She answered, "O my king, I have a little sister, and I would say my farewells to her." So the king sent for the little sister, who came and threw herself upon the neck of Shahrazad, and lastly cowered down beside the bed. Then the king rose and, taking the maiden Shahrazad, ravished her virginity. Afterwards they spoke together, and Dunazade said to Shahrazad, "Tell us, my sister, some of your tales of marvel, that the night may pass pleasantly." And Shahrazad answered, "Gladly, and as a duty, if the great and courteous king permits." When the king heard these words, and being moreover unable to sleep, he was in no way averse to listening to the tale of Shahrazad. And Shahrazad this first night began the following tale.